head on a spike. Construction workers got the shock of a lifetime in Sweden when they found some skulls in a peat bog that had been smashed. But it wasn't recent. The bones date back to the Stone Age, and there was a lot more to this disturbing discovery than meets the eye. When a new railway line was to be constructed for freight trains moving through the area, construction workers uncovered the grisly remains and called in the archaeologists. They have now turned up not only smashed heads, but heads on skewers, and also fragments from animals and tools made from bone and horn. The human heads found skewered on some poles in a pile of rocks was kind of reminiscent of Ivan the Terrible, but 8,000 years ago, this place used to be a pond, and over time, the pond turned into a peat marsh. Frederick Hallgreen, the project leader for the excavation, said all signs point to some kind of strange ritual activity going on here with the Stone Age people. These skulls were detached from the bodies, put on spikes, and then buried with great care. Archaeologists found the skulls of 10 people in the boggy sediment, which marks the first evidence of Mesolithic hunter-gatherers mounting human skulls on stakes. Some of these skulls show signs of trauma, but then the injuries showed signs of healing. After they had gotten hit in the head, someone had taken care of them, but how their heads ended up on stakes is unclear. Swedish forensic scientists are working on reconstructing the faces and clothing of some of these people to see what they might have looked like so long ago. Even stranger is that the bodies were buried underneath a burial mound, which they didn't really use in Sweden until way later in the Iron Age, then only until the end of the Viking era. Nobody can understand why these Stone Age citizens, who had likely been hunters and gatherers, had gone through all the trouble of creating complex burial mounds and then go and impale some heads on some poles. It's all very confusing. Pompei mummy. In the ruined city of Pompei, Italy, archaeologists have uncovered a mysterious tomb and a mummified corpse. Researchers with the University of Valencia in Spain made the incredible find, but since then, it's been boggling scientists because the customs of the time dictated that the bodies of adults were to be cremated, not buried, and certainly not mummified. This is now the only tomb uncovered in Pompeii that has a burial chamber, and because of how well preserved the city of Pompeii is, thanks to the eruption that blanketed the city in ash, the tomb revealed quite a bit about the dead man inside of it. Here's what archaeologists have found out so far. The mummy belongs to a man named Marcus Venerius Secundio. His tomb was constructed probably within the decade before the city was destroyed. The dead man was once a public slave turned guardian of the local temple of Venus. He managed to achieve a high economic status upon being freed, and he even found himself a wife, who researchers discovered inside the tomb. They found a glass container with the ash remains of a woman who went by the name Novia Amabilis. But then why was this man not cremated? Perhaps he had his own customs from his past. The only thing archaeologists can come up with is that he had a fascination with Greek culture, because in Greece at the time, burials were preferred over cremations. Mary Magdalene's bones. In the south of France, there is a small medieval town believed to hold some of the most sacred relics in Christianity, the skull and bones of Mary Magdalene. The town of Saint Maximin la Sainte Baume is home to a basilica dedicated to Mary Magdalene, the famous alleged lady of the night who followed Jesus and witnessed his crucifixion. Mary Magdalene is actually mentioned in the Bible more than any other disciple and more than any other woman besides Jesus' direct family. In the basilica under a glass dome lies the skull of Mary Magdalene. Each year, the skull is paraded around the town as part of a large religious festival that includes flutes, rifles, and horses. Her blackened skull has been mounted in a golden reliquary with flowing long hair for hundreds of years and is now behind a bulletproof case. Every July 22nd, hundreds of people gather to see the religious processions of holy relics that come from all over the world. But perhaps the star of the show is the skull of Mary Magdalene. But how did her skull end up here? Legend has it that when Mary Magdalene fled the Holy Land with her child, she took refuge in a cave near the small town in the mountains. The cave today is a monastery known as the Sanctuary of Mary Magdalene. The only way to reach it is to hike about 90 minutes through an old forest. Dominican monks have been guarding this sanctuary since 1295. It's not clear how Mary's skull came to be separated from her body and housed in a small basilica in the south of France. But what's really incredible is that in 1974, The skull was analyzed by scientists and confirmed to be the physical remains of a woman from the 1st century who died at the age of 50. National Geographic reports she was of Mediterranean descent, and the scientists were able to recreate the shape of her nose and other facial features. These characteristics all match up with the story of Mary Magdalene. The analysis even showed that whoever the skull belonged to had dark brown hair, but unfortunately there is no way beyond a doubt to prove that the skull is hers. But all the pieces do surprisingly fit together. Empire of Death. Some of the creepiest discoveries in history have been made inside the Paris catacombs. There are over 200 miles of spooky tunnels underneath the City of Love, most of them lined from the floor to the ceiling with skulls and bones of dead people. The history behind this Empire of Death is nothing short of ghoulish. It all started in the 17th century when the population began to spiral out of control and there were too many people dying. Graves and cemeteries were overflowing, and to fix the problem of what to do with the dead, Paris began sticking the deceased inside the tunnels built under their streets. The tunnels have been around since the 13th century, the remains of old quarries that helped turn Paris into a thriving city. By the time the tunnels stopped being used as burial grounds, there were 6 to 7 million dead Parisians entombed underground. What a lot of people don't know is that the dead buried in the catacombs weren't fresh when they were put down there. The city actually began emptying out its cemeteries in 1786 and putting the old bones beneath the city. It took about 12 years to fill the catacombs, with some of the oldest human remains dating back 1,200 years, though the last person buried here was in 1890. Today, about a mile of the catacombs are open to visitors, but most of the tunnels are off-limits. Would you visit these creepy tunnels? Or have you already? Let us all know in the comments below. Bomb-shaped time capsule. In 2017, when construction workers in Manhattan's Flatiron District discovered a bomb from World War II, everybody was forced to evacuate and panic ensued. The NYPD's bomb unit was called in, and thankfully, the frightening object turned out to be a bizarre time capsule that looked like a bomb. The container was deposited by a nightclub called Danceteria, which was popular during the 1980s. Madonna, Andy Warhol, fashion designer Betsy Johnson, and the Rolling Stones are just some of the famous people who frequented the club. Former owner John Argento told Gothamist that the time capsule was not meant to be found for 10,000 years. He also claimed that he knew a scare like this would happen. The vessel contained letters addressed to Argento's future self. It was the product of an idea dreamed up by club promoter Rudolph Piper, who paid around $200 for the deceptively dangerous-looking time capsule. He was reportedly inspired by time capsules that were placed at the World's Fairgrounds in 1939 and 1964. The club collected letters for the time capsule for 3 weeks before burying it. Danceteria closed in 1986, but thanks to this shocking discovery, its legacy lives on. Aztec Slaughter. Archaeologists working in Mexico have recovered the ghoulish remains of Spaniards murdered by the Aztecs. The story is one of the most brutal, where both sides committed horrible crimes. The Aztecs captured a convoy of Spaniards traveling with a group of several hundred indigenous allies. The Aztecs captured the entire convoy and then cannibalized them, literally gnawing on the flesh of the Spanish invaders and their treacherous allies. In response, Hernán Cortés massacred a group of Aztec women and children. This isn't just a story either, as it's backed up by archaeological evidence. Researchers have discovered proof that over the course of 8 months, the Spanish and their allies were offered as sacrifices to the Aztec gods at the city of Tecoaque. Archaeologists have found the remains of male and female prisoners who were strung up on racks, had their heads cut off, and made part of Aztec skull towers. Bone analysis even showed that some of these Spanish women had been sacrificed while pregnant. As the Aztecs made sacrifices to their bloodthirsty gods, the Catholic Spaniards looked upon this as an offense against God himself and vowed to defeat these people once and for all. Medieval castle. At Sultan Hall in the United Kingdom, researchers have discovered the sandstone walls of a medieval castle. They've also found a few trinkets that may have been left behind by religious pilgrims visiting the site. For years, the owners of Sultan Hall, an Elizabethan estate, were wondering what the mysterious dirt mounds were in their backyard. The owners of the estate called in archaeologists, who then uncovered evidence of human habitation going back thousands of years, surprising the landowners. excavations show that a huge castle once stood on the grounds. The castle dates back to around the 13th century, with researchers from Cardiff University uncovering sandstone walls and pieces of timber, which they believe may have been part of a moat that encircled the small castle fortress. The castle stood on the road to the ancient village of Wem, perhaps protecting the small village from troublemakers. Sultan Hall was built in the 1600s, meaning the estate must have gone up just a few years after the castle was destroyed, or even while it still stood. The whole area has been occupied by some of the wealthiest members of English society ever since 1086. But its history is even richer than that. Previous excavations uncovered Neolithic flint from 5,500 years ago, meaning the grounds of Sultan Hall have a history that goes back at least 7,500 years. A lethal snake. In Australia, beachgoers made a pretty nasty discovery at Bathers Beach during their morning stroll. The locals were aghast when they came upon a monstrous reptile lying in the sand, somehow washed up on shore. The snake didn't look familiar to these people, so they called Jacqueline Lloyd. Jacqueline is a snake rescuer and the owner of Coastal Reptile Removers. She couldn't believe her eyes when she showed up to the beach and found a highly venomous yellow-bellied sea snake lounging as if it belonged there. According to what Jacqueline told local news, she never gets called out for these types of snakes. Yellow-bellied sea snakes live in the deep waters of the Indian Ocean, not on land. It must have been blown to shore because of a storm. In the end, it was lucky that the beachgoers made the call because the yellow-bellied snake is wildly venomous and could have killed somebody. In fact, the snake is so venomous that a single bite can kill a person in mere minutes. The reason for this is that the snake hunts fish and has evolved potent venom that can paralyze a fish immediately so that its victims don't swim away. What did Jacqueline do with this terrifying predator? She packed it up in a box and handed it over to the Department of Biodiversity Conservation and Attractions, who did their best to rehabilitate the animal. The last we heard, the snake is making a full recovery and should be released back into the wild soon. Ancient Hepatitis B. An ancient mummy from the 16th century is currently the oldest known case of hepatitis B in the world. 500 years ago, a young child died at the age of just 2. This child's remains were put inside of a crypt in Naples, Italy. Thanks to the dry conditions of the Basilica San Domenico Maggiore, where he was buried, the remains of the child slowly mummified over time. In the 1980s, researchers dug up the preserved body and diagnosed him with smallpox disease. But this was incorrect. A new genomic test revealed that the child didn't suffer from smallpox, but had instead been afflicted with hepatitis B. According to Smithsonian, the autopsy in the 1980s showed a rash on the mummy's body consistent with smallpox. But then, in 2016, the DNA was re-evaluated and not a single trace of the smallpox virus was found. Instead, they discovered hepatitis. Today, hepatitis B is still not something you want to catch. About 350 million people live with the virus, which infects the liver and spreads through the body via the blood. By analyzing the child mummy, scientists learned that almost nothing about the virus has changed in 500 years. It was already pretty much perfect when it infected the kid, though whether this is good news or not is yet to be seen. Probably not. Death by lions. Executions throughout the Roman Empire were particularly gruesome, according to historians, who believe that lions were sometimes used for carrying out death sentences against humans. A copper alloy key handle found in Leicestershire, England in 2016 was the first solid evidence of this theory being true. The object dates back to around 200 AD, roughly 100 years after Rome conquered Britain. It was so old, its design was unrecognizable at first. A thorough cleaning revealed a design of a man fighting an angry lion as 4 naked and terrified youths looked on. It was unlike any other Roman artifact that had ever been discovered, according to study co-author Gavin Speed. A subsequent study concluded that the scene represents a public execution. The Friar's Causeway key handle, as it came to be known, illuminates the brutal character of Roman authority in this province, in the words of study co-author John Pierce. Rome has a well-documented history of its law allowing for criminals to be thrown to wild beasts. These brutal executions were known to happen at the Colosseum, but this is the first evidence of it happening as far away as Britain, which was on the outskirts of the Roman Empire. The London Times reported that lions were transported there from Mesopotamia and North Africa via riverboats and wagons. When we think of ancient Rome's legacy, some of the first things that often come to mind are their impressive architecture and technological innovations. But discoveries like this remind us that even advanced ancient societies engaged in gory practices that are nothing short of barbaric compared to modern-day standards. What do you think? Should bad people still be thrown to the lions? Let me know in the comments below. Viking slave graves. A group of Viking graves recently discovered in Norway has given researchers a gruesome look into how these seafaring warriors used to treat their slaves. The graves belonged to slaves who had been beheaded and then buried with their masters. Approximately 10 ancient people were discovered in multiple graves, with either 2 or 3 bodies sharing a single plot. Analysis of the human remains has shown that the people who were buried without their heads had eaten a very different diet from those who weren't decapitated. Elise Naumann from the University of Oslo says that the beheaded people were slaves offered as grave gifts to be buried alongside prominent members of society. This explains why the diets were so different. Now for the ugly part that nobody wants to talk about. The Vikings are often admired for being fierce raiders from between around the years 700 to 1200. But the truth is that they were also vicious killers who often stole people from the places they raided and kept them as slaves. That's why everyone was so afraid of them. They're cool if they're on your side. If you're a monk living in some monastery on the cliff watching them come towards you, then you wouldn't be so excited to see them. The other side of the truth is that Vikings weren't actually just barbarians who spent all their time plundering. Most of them were ordinary farmers who relied on the slaves brought back by their warriors to keep their agricultural gears turning. And yes, the Vikings treated their slaves like absolute garbage. Thanks to these new burials, now we know that they even sacrificed slaves and had them buried with their masters to assist them beyond death. Rock of the Fairies. The ancient dolmen discovered in France is the largest in the entire world. If you're wondering what a dolmen is, these structures are basically the oldest graves found throughout much of Europe. Many of them go back at least 5,000 years, just like this one. They were used as burial structures with someone, researchers don't usually know who, buried beneath. This one is an incredible ancient specimen, a kind of passage tomb made of 32 stones acting as the walls and 9 giant stones as the roof slabs. The structure itself is a giant compared to most of the dolmens found around the world, measuring 60 feet long and at its highest point is roughly 12 feet high. The heaviest stone used to build the monument weighs roughly 40 tons. But how did ancient people manage to lift such heavy stones? This particular dolmen found in France comes from between 4,500 and 5,000 years ago during the late Neolithic period, and yet no excavations have been made at the site. Nothing has been found except for the dolmen's huge stones. There could be bodies underneath, priceless artifacts, who knows what else? Local legend says the site was built by fairies overnight to prove that they existed, and that if a pair of lovers comes to the site and counts the same number of stones, they will be happy forever. Back in the day, the passage grave would have been covered by a pile of stones called a cairn, so it would have even been much larger thousands of years ago. As of now, nobody knows who built the dolmen, how many people are buried under the soil, or why the ancient people went through such great lengths to make it in the first place. Cocooned mummy. Archaeologists were recently surprised by the bizarre discovery of a mud mummy in Egypt. The mummy was found cocooned inside a hardened shell of mud. Archaeologists are calling it an unparalleled find since the mortuary treatment of preserving a human corpse in mud is something that has never before been documented in the Egyptian archaeological record. Archaeologists working on the case believe that the mud wrap was used to keep the mummy preserved after it got damaged. Either that, or it was kind of like a discount mummification service done by people who couldn't afford to mummify a dead relative the right way. The mummy has been dated back to the New Kingdom's 21st dynasty. This was anywhere between 1294 BC and 945 BC. It was a time when the elite members of Egyptian society were mummifying everyone of importance, and the lower classes wanted to get in on the action. Mud was a much more affordable material than what the elite used, and so it's no surprise that some of the poorer citizens made their own homemade mummies with mud. Think of it like purchasing a fake designer purse to fit in with the latest trends, only around 3,000 years ago, and the person you were buying it for was dead. Unfortunately, nobody actually knows where the mud mummy came from. The issue is that the mummy was donated to the University of Sydney back in 1860. Whoever donated the mummy had stuffed it inside of an unrelated coffin, so the mummy could be sold as a full set, mummy and coffin. The original coffin has never been found, and nobody knows whose coffin the mud mummy was put inside. Perhaps it was an extremely rare occurrence, or more likely, the mud just dissolved over time, and so archaeologists have not been able to find more. The skull of Pliny the Elder, or at least what's left of him, is sitting in a museum in Rome on display for all to see. The creepy display is a broken skull with most of its face missing, sitting among other bizarre relics such as pickled liver stones and malformed fetuses. But nobody really knows if this is indeed the skull of Pliny the Elder, the famed admiral and one of the most influential scholars of the time. Pliny worked his entire life to create a vast encyclopedia of general knowledge. We know that Pliny the Elder died during the catastrophic eruption of Mount Vesuvius in the year 79. We just have no sure way of knowing if this skull really belongs to him. Biologists, geochemists, and even anthropologists have been conducting tests on the skull through the last few years to try and crack the case. The creepy artifact was discovered near Pompei about 120 years ago. Pliny had been staying about 25 miles from the volcano at a villa when he was alerted to the huge cloud of smoke flowing into the sky. We know this because of the letters left behind by his nephew, Pliny the Younger. Seeing what was happening, Pliny the Elder wanted to get closer to the volcano to witness the eruption firsthand. He ran to the volcano while everyone else was running away from it. He then died in his pursuit of scientific knowledge, probably asphyxiated by volcanic fumes at the age of 56. In 1900, his alleged skull was found during excavations on a beach that recovered 73 skeletons total. One of the skeletons had a gold bracelet decorated with vipers, something Pliny the Elder was said to have worn, and so began the search to prove if it was actually him. An unexpected encounter. Tennessee resident Casey Allen and her son Ethan recently visited North Myrtle Beach in North Carolina so the teenager could practice surfing. While reviewing footage of Ethan hitting the waves after the trip, Allen noticed something she didn't see before: her son's surfboard passing over a shark. Immediately after that happened, the shark jumped out of the water and Ethan fell off his surfboard. Just like his mom, he was unaware of the shark's presence at the time. Allen, who's from Myrtle Beach, wrote in a Facebook post that she had seen sharks in the water before, but had never captured one on camera. She posted the shocking video on social media and it went viral. Some commenters found the clip to be fascinating, while others thought it was downright terrifying. Reactions ranged from humorous, with one person writing, "Pretty cool photo bomb," to serious and concerned, with another person chiming in about how incidents like this are why their family stays out of the water when they visit the beach. Which side are you on? Let me know in the comments below. Yahoo News reported that the shark is believed to be a spinner shark. Adults reach between 6 and 10 feet long and weigh as much as 120 pounds, but are considered a non-threat to humans. Dangerous or not, crossing paths with one would certainly be unsettling. Stake through the heart. The skeleton of a vampire has been discovered in Bulgaria with a stake driven right through its heart. The skeleton was found in the ruins of an ancient city by a local Bulgarian archaeologist. The dead person died sometime in his 40s or 50s and had gotten a metal stake bashed through his chest, probably to prevent him from rising from the dead. Even if this guy wasn't really a vampire who feasted on human flesh, the locals most certainly thought he was. It was common practice in medieval times to drive a metal spike through a corpse to stop it from waking up later and seeking revenge on the living. This most recent creepy discovery was made by Professor Nikolai Ovcharov in the ruins of Perperikon. The city itself was discovered around 20 years ago and was originally inhabited 7,000 years ago in 5000 BC. The city was once home to the famous Temple of Dionysus, dedicated to the Greek god of wine and fertility. But the city was also home to several impressive fortresses, a large sanctuary, and multiple dead vampires. Other than just having the stake driven through his heart, this guy also had his left leg amputated below the knee and placed beside his body. There were 2 other graves like this discovered in Bulgaria in 2012 and 2013, though they were at a different site and not at all related. As of right now, researchers have found roughly 100 vampire skeletons throughout Bulgaria, making ancient Bulgaria a whole lot more paranormal than the Transylvanian region of Romania to the north. And now for number 6. But first, it's shoutout time! I wanted to give a big shout out to Tina Ellis and Todd Jeffrey. Hope this video doesn't creep you out too much right before you go to bed. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe for more videos like these. Ancient Roman eggs. Archaeologists recently cracked open some ancient eggs that date back to the Roman occupation of Great Britain. It happened when they were excavating a settlement in central England that was founded 1700 years ago. They got a nose full of history when they accidentally broke open the eggs that had been sitting there for nearly 2,000 years. The eggs came from chickens, and they were left behind at an ancient community along an old Roman road. The eggs were inside of a pit, which is how they managed to stay preserved for so long buried in the soil. Other artifacts found with the eggs include a wooden basket, a pair of leather shoes, and some tools. As the archaeologists were trying to retrieve the artifacts, they accidentally cracked open 2 of the eggs, which released a potent rotten egg smell that scared them right out of the pit. That's a 2,000-year-old smell. Can you imagine? Only a single egg managed to be taken out intact, and it's now being celebrated as the only complete Roman egg to ever be recovered from Britain. The dig project manager, Stuart Foreman, called it an incredible find. He and his colleagues believe the pit was originally used for malting grain, which was then used in beer. But by the end of the 3rd century, the pit had turned into a kind of wishing well where the residents tossed things in as offerings to the gods, like eggs and coins, and apparently their leather shoes. Blood Lake. A mysterious lake has been discovered thanks to Google Earth, and it seems to be filled with blood. It's called the Lago Vermelho Lake in Baghdad, Iraq. It's located at the edge of the city in the suburbs and has caught the attention of the public because it turned a bizarre shade of blood red. It is extremely noticeable when looking at the satellite images on Google Earth. There are other nearby lakes, but they're all blue. This one is bright red, and nobody seems to know why. Some have speculated that there's so much blood leaking into the lake that it turned red. Amazingly, the phenomenon was witnessed for the first time in 2007, and nobody has solved the mystery yet. Speculations have been thrown around, but there has been no official statement given as to why the water turned red. And while you might be thinking it's just some kind of Google glitch, the lake might actually be filled with blood. Yes, real blood. One source reported that there are a number of slaughterhouses in the region, and perhaps the blood from the slaughterhouses could be draining directly into the lake, turning it red. Roman ring. Back in the 1st century BC, there was a Roman military garrison positioned in the municipality of Belver de Cerdanya in the Pyrenees. The soldiers abandoned the site suddenly because of a civil war that broke out between Julius Caesar and Pompey's sons. Because the soldiers fled so quickly, they left behind a lot of their belongings. The military garrison was then forgotten about and not rediscovered again until recently. Archaeologists have so far recovered dozens of amazing artifacts that once belonged to the Roman soldiers. They have found jars called amphora that were used to transport oil, a handsome collection of ancient coins, and 3 extremely valuable rings. The artifacts were found by researchers with the Autonomous University of Barcelona. While all the artifacts are quite cool, the one that stands out the most is one of the rings. It was forged in iron and still has a semi-precious stone embedded in its front depicting a scene from Greek mythology. On the stone is a picture of the legendary warrior Achilles fighting with Queen Penthesilea of the Amazons. According to Greek mythology, Achilles killed the queen during battle, which was quite the shock since Penthesilea was the daughter of Ares, god of war, and she was expected to win. Satanic abandoned home. A very creepy home was recently discovered covered from wall to wall in terrifying satanic graffiti. The discovery was made by an urban explorer named Adam Corkill, who documented his journey into the abandoned Hell House and then posted what he found online. The country house had been left to rot a few decades before Adam explored it. It was deserted probably in the 1970s, as the interior of the house still looked straight out of a bad 70s sitcom. In fact, Adam said it felt like the occupant had only just left, despite the place being empty for a very long time. Everything was damp, the floor tiles were cracked, and there were personal effects strewn across just about every surface. Whoever had abandoned the house had done so seemingly at a moment's notice. And as if finding a creepy house abandoned wasn't bad enough already, Adam discovered strange graffiti on the walls talking about Satan. It's unclear whether the original homeowners were associated with some kind of satanic cult, but it's more likely some kids came by later and were just bored. Maybe cult members had been using the dilapidated structure for evil rituals. Adam did say that he felt ghosts in the house, though he was unable to say if it was haunted for sure. Mysterious Buenos Aires tunnels. In 1985, a resident of the historical Buenos Aires neighborhood San Telmo accidentally discovered what is still to this day one of the most important archaeological sites in the city. He found the portal to a secret underground labyrinth. It happened after he purchased an abandoned mansion with the intention of turning it into a restaurant. At the time of the purchase, the mansion was in dire shape. It needed to be heavily renovated, which the buyer, Jorge Eckstein, was willing to do. He began renovations and immediately noticed something bizarre about the foundation. He had a team of archaeologists come in to investigate, and they told him that the building was abandoned in the 1800s during a deadly wave of yellow fever. To get to the bottom of what was going on, Jorge dug beneath the foundation and was shocked to discover a creepy underground tunnel. Archaeologists had no idea there were tunnels underneath the city. They found roughly a mile of passageways, which they later learned were built by the locals back in 1780 to reroute a stream beneath the city that kept causing floods. There were no skeletons or ghosts in the tunnels, but they were still pretty spooky. They have since been restored and open for visitors. An ugly mummy. While investigating a site in the ancient Egyptian city of Aswan earlier this year, a team of Spanish researchers discovered an unopened tomb hidden in some cliffs. Archaeologist Dr. Martina Bardonova led the excavation that followed, which was carried out as the winds of a Saharan sandstorm approached gale force. The harrowing ordeal was broadcast on the British docu-series Secrets of Egypt's Valley of the Kings. Inside the tomb, the team found a nearly 4,000-year-old terracotta coffin. Dr. Bardonova carefully pried the lid off and was immediately put off by what she saw. She warned her colleagues that the mummy looked scary and to be careful. The mummy, if it can even be called that, was extremely poorly bandaged. They described the site as skeletal human remains covered in a black material. Additional experts were summoned to the scene to provide insight on the strange discovery. Bone expert Dr. Miguel Lopez explained that the remains belonged to a woman who was at least 70 years old when she died. Ancient Egyptians almost never lived that long. The average life expectancy was around 25 years old, just a fraction of the woman's age. For this reason alone, the burial is both bizarre and fascinating. And now for number 6. But first, it's shout-out time! Want to say a big thank you to Wilmer Santos and Tomasina Egan for being so nice and supporting Origins Explained. If you are new here, be sure to hit that subscribe button for more amazing discoveries, and come be part of the Origins Explained family. Love you guys! Mummy Lake. Mesa Verde National Park in Colorado is home to the most fascinating ancient city anywhere in the United States of America. This place was lived in 1,000 years ago by the ancestral Puebloans, centuries before Christopher Columbus ever landed. They built their city into the wall of a great cliff, carving their houses out of the stone and then vanishing mysteriously without leaving a trace. But a new discovery in the Mesa Verde Park has nothing to do with the city itself, but rather a lake that may have had a scary association with ancient rituals. It's called Mummy Lake, and it's a circular pit that archaeologists used to think was a water reservoir for the people living in the city. It was not held to hold water, but rituals. More recent studies of the lake revealed that what people used to think were canals were actually ancient footpaths that led to the lake from a few key religious structures, a shrine house and a cliff palace. Between the years 900 and 1200, the locals may have been using the lake in their religious ceremonies. It could have been used as a depository for the dead, or perhaps where sacrifices were offered to the gods. Maybe even a ball court. Scientists don't know exactly what it was used for, but it definitely held great value to the Puebloans. The cult of the rain god. Tlaloc is the oldest and mightiest of the Mesoamerican gods. The name translates to something like he who makes things sprout, or the nectar of the earth. Tlaloc represents the essence of rain and thunder, with the ancient Aztecs beseeching him to strengthen the clouds and send rain to grow their crops. He was one of the most important and formidable gods of the Aztec Empire. Not only did they call on him for rain and water, but he was also important for fertility. Effigies and images of the rain god have been found all throughout Teotihuacan in figurines and carvings, though the origin of Tlaloc goes back much further, to the Olmec culture. They worshipped a similar god named Anue, who may have been the inspiration for Tlaloc, who came later. Tlaloc is quite scary in Aztec culture. He is shown wearing a strange mask with large round eyes and long fangs. Every culture in Mesoamerica worshipped Tlaloc, they just did it under different names. For the Zapotec culture from what is now modern Oaxaca in Mexico, he was called Pitao. To the Mayans, he was known as Chac. In archaeology, there is no place more sacred to the old worshippers of Tlaloc than the Templo Mayor at Tenochtitlan, the ancient capital of the Aztecs. Archaeologists have uncovered proof of rituals and other ceremonies here dedicated to the rain god. Tlaloc had his own temple at the top of the pyramid next to a temple dedicated to the warlord god Huitzilopochtli, and both of them were very thirsty for blood and required sacrifice. And now for number 5. But first, want to give a big shout out to Josie Bunny and Iman Guha, who's a new subscriber. Welcome, and thanks so much for supporting this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already to join the Origins Explained family. Aliens on Mars. It turns out there may just be aliens on Mars after all, and they may have once built statues very similar to the ones found on Easter Island. At least that's what some of the experts are saying. An alien statue was allegedly found on the Red Planet, carved with the likeness of a human face. The statue was discovered in an image published by NASA and apparently missed by most of the people who saw the picture. You have to look extremely close, and only then can you see the small stone carving. It's about 5.5 feet tall, with some saying it is direct evidence that a civilization once lived on Mars and has since either gone extinct or underground. The statue looks so real that some people have called the competency of NASA into question. They say that NASA either missed the alien artifact or neglected to report it, which leads to more questions. For example, what else has NASA found on Mars and not told the public about? What if there really are ruins of an ancient civilization and NASA just won't tell us? What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. The creepy hum. The residents of the small industrial town of Kokomo in Indiana made a rather creepy discovery back in 1999. The people living here began reporting a low and consistent hum that was driving them completely insane and forcing some people to leave the town. A lifelong Kokomo resident told ABC News back in 2002 that everyone knew something was going wrong from the very start. The hum was giving people a headache, and that headache would turn into a constant migraine. Local residents also experienced a variety of other health problems after being exposed to the bizarre hum, ranging from strokes to nosebleeds. The constant stress was making everyone go crazy. But here's the deal. Only a small fraction of residents could hear the creepy hum. Of the 45,000 people living in Kokomo, only a few hundred could hear the noise. Still, enough people heard it that the city launched an investigation to see where the strange noise was coming from. As it turned out, the hum wasn't that creepy at all. It also had nothing to do with anything supernatural. The culprit was a set of large fans at the nearby Chrysler plant. They were giving off a weird frequency that only some people could pick up, and it was so constant it was driving them insane. Even after the plant fixed the fans, some people complained the hum was still going. Even today, some people who visit the city claim they can hear the noise. Increase in wildfires. Wildfires have become increasingly problematic in certain parts of the world in recent years, including California. Earlier this year, experts from the state's only wildfire research facility, the San Jose University-based Wildfire Interdisciplinary Research Center, made a disturbing discovery that does not bode well for the future in terms of combating these out-of-control blazes. During an annual visit to Mount Umunhum in the San Francisco Bay Area in April, the team noticed a distinct lack of new plant growth. It's something they're used to seeing at that time of year, which is the peak month for something called fuel moisture content, or FMC. This is the ratio of moisture to combustible material in plants, and it's used to determine a plant's proneness to burning. When FMCs are high, as they usually are in April, plants are least likely to catch fire. But these levels were terrifyingly low this year, as the region emerged from its third driest rainy season on record. The research center monitors FMCs at 3 sites in the area, and each one yielded equally dismal results. To give you an idea, the SMC measurements at one site called Blackberry Hill were lower than they were during California's last major drought, which lasted from 2012 to 2016. While there is no good news from these findings, making the information available helps fire behavior specialists and firefighting agencies prepare for the problems they can expect to face during the dry season. It's not looking good. California experienced its worst wildfire season on record last year, with over 10,000 fires destroying some 4.2 million acres of land. Speaking with the San Francisco Gate, Center Director Craig Clements expressed his fear that this year's wildfire season could be just as bad as the last. But we won't know for sure until the time comes, and this uncertainty makes it all the more frightening. The Cooch No Stone. This strange and mysterious stone panel, known as the Cooch No Stone, was unearthed in Clydebank, the United Kingdom, after 50 years buried under the dirt. The stone itself dates back to the year 3000 BC, but it was buried in 1965 after archaeologists stumbled upon it and didn't know how to keep it safe. Archaeologists couldn't physically remove the stone because of its size. It measures about 24 feet by 39 feet. That's about as long as a semi-trailer and twice as tall as a giraffe. So they took some pictures and then buried it to protect it from the weather and vandals. This thing is huge, one of the greatest examples of Neolithic markings anywhere in Europe. The stone is covered in bizarre symbols and rings, though they don't tell researchers much about the stone's history because no one really understands what these things mean. Nobody knows who made it 5,000 years ago or what its purpose was. The only reason it was dug up now is that archaeologists wanted to use new 3D imaging technology to digitally record its surface and try to better understand this mysterious artifact. Dr. Kenny Brophy from Glasgow University says the Cooch No Stone is the biggest Neolithic art panel in Europe, which is wild because it's sitting in the middle of a suburb. Unfortunately, modern graffiti was found on its surface, suggesting that even though it was buried, vandals still managed to get to it. Ancient brain surgery. A case of prehistoric surgery dating back 5,000 years has shocked scientists. The discovery came during excavations near a small village in Crimea. Anthropologists working with the Institute of Archaeology of the Russian Academy of Sciences uncovered the skull of a man who had undergone cranial surgery. At the site of the excavations, 18 burials were discovered from between the Bronze Age and the time that the Scythians ruled the region. The victim of the surgery was among these remains and was in his 20s when he died. According to the researchers, the surgeon who had operated on him did so with shocking precision. The surgeon scraped a huge area of bone away from the rest of the skull, leaving a thin layer less than 1 millimeter thick. Even more amazing is that the surgeon had done this using stone instruments. Imagine getting brain surgery and the doctors are using stone tools. This type of operation is known as a trepanation, and it probably killed him. The bone surface showed no signs of any healing, meaning the man probably died in the days following the surgery. The surgery had likely been an attempt to relieve serious headaches or cure some other sort of affliction that remains unknown. A ghastly appendage. New Orleans is known for being one of the most haunted cities in the United States, drawing ghost hunters and paranormal thrill seekers from all over the world. But one supernaturally curious pair recently encountered a mystifying presence that was kind of more bizarre than scary. Corrine and Sabrina, who host a podcast called Two Girls, One Ghost, stopped at John Lafitte's Blacksmith Bar during a girls' trip. The historic drinking establishment does not use electricity and prefers to light candles instead, creating an eerie atmosphere to match its equally off-putting reputation as one of the city's many haunted properties. It's named after a man named John Lafitte, who was notorious during the early 18th century for his acts of piracy. While there, the duo took photos of their surroundings to see if the camera captured anything that was invisible to the naked eye. While going through the pictures, the ladies noticed what looked like a man's privates in the bar's fireplace. The woman said that while incidents like this are rare, sightings of John Lafitte's ghost are rather common. He's known for being somewhat of a ladies' man, occasionally giving female patrons a flirtatious pinch. That said, perhaps what the women saw makes some sense after all. Adidas Boots Mummy. An ancient mummy was discovered with a pair of very old boots, dated back over 1,000 years. This is one of the stranger discoveries that's been made in recent times. The mummy was actually a Mongolian seamstress who was buried with 4 changes of clothing, a professional sewing kit, the head of a horse, and the head of a ram. She was also discovered wearing a fine pair of boots that have been compared to modern Adidas shoes. They're red and stripy, they're actually quite fashionable despite their age, and they wouldn't even look that out of place on someone's feet today. Archaeologists have no way of knowing exactly who this woman was during her life, but she was probably the ancient equivalent of a high-end fashion designer. She also suffered a brutal death. Scientists discovered a significant head injury that may have killed her. It seems that sometime during the 10th century, deep in the Altai Mountains of Mongolia, the seamstress was hit in the skull with something and then buried. She may have fallen down and hit her head on a rock, or somebody might have bludgeoned her to death and then tried to steal her wares. There's no way of knowing for sure. What we do know is that she was such a valued member of society that when her corpse was found, she was given an extremely elaborate burial. The Great Flood. Researcher Ronnie Gallagher believes he has solved one of the biggest questions in ancient Egyptian history. For decades, historians have been trying to figure out why the original settlers in Egypt made their great civilization in the Nile Valley, and where they originally came from. Ronnie says it's because of a catastrophic flood that doused huge parts of Eurasia and forced people to migrate to places of safety, like the Nile Valley. This theory is backed up by ancient Egyptian texts that describe some of the earliest burial rituals in the country as taking dead people back to their ancestral homelands. What's even more shocking is that Ronnie believes the flood may have been similar to the biblical flood in which Noah built his great ark. If Ronnie's research is to be believed, the ancestral homeland of the Egyptians is actually modern Azerbaijan. It's not that far away, so it's no surprise that after a great flood, the locals would have strayed into Egypt almost 8,000 years ago. To back up this theory, mollusks and small marine fossils have been found in the area that date back to 7750 BC. There was almost definitely a great flood, though this was way before the Bible was ever written. Then, after the Egyptians settled along the Nile, it took them just over 2,000 years to start building their pyramids. Desert Geoglyphs. The giant Blythe intaglios is a desert geoglyph located in the Colorado Desert. There are about 200 geoglyphs throughout the region, though this is the biggest and the most interesting because it depicts 3 humanoid figures that don't quite look right, along with 2 bizarre animals and a mysterious spiral symbol. The geoglyph was first mentioned by settlers in the early part of the 19th century, and then rediscovered in 1932 by a pilot flying across the desert. A survey was then done by Arthur Woodward, who was working with the Natural History Museum in Los Angeles. Arthur and his team discovered that the geoglyphs were made by scraping off layers of the surface to reveal the lighter soil beneath. The displaced soil was then used to outline the figures. The largest of these geoglyphs is about 171 feet in length. It's also only visible from the air. While a lot of people think they have to fly all the way to Peru to see the Nazca lines, you can take a trip to Colorado and see something very similar. These geoglyphs were probably made by either the Mojave or the Quechan, and archaeologists believe the human figures were meant to represent a deity known as Mastamo, who was revered as the creator of all life. Shrunken head. There's been a shrunken head on display at a Georgia university for decades. Back in 1979, the shrunken head was used as a prop in the John Huston film Wise Blood. Well, what began as a prop has turned into a real piece of creepy history. A new study has authenticated the shrunken head as the actual head of a person. According to Insider, the grim artifact is now being sent back to Ecuador, back to the country of its origin. The head was acquired by Mercer University some years ago thanks to a former faculty member who picked up the artifact while serving in the military. The shrunken head is known as a tsansa, and it was likely taken from a defeated enemy around a century ago by an Amazonian warrior. When the former employee of the university was traveling through the Amazon, he met a tribe and traded them for the head, then brought it home with him. Craig D. Byron from the university said it's a relief to have the shrunken head away from the school, not only because everyone is creeped out by it, but also because it was just unnerving to have around. It was being kept inside of an underground vault, it was illegal to do anything with it because it was a human body part, and once the university was able to prove it was genuine, the staff were happy to ship it out of the country. The legend of shrunken heads goes back a long time, but early European explorers in the Americas did not know how the tribes used to make them. It turns out the head was sliced open, the skull was removed, the eyes and mouth were stitched shut, it was filled with hot rocks, and then boiled. The process took quite a long time, but eventually the head was shrunken down to about the size of a man's fist, maintaining certain facial features and becoming a symbol to scare the daylights out of your enemies. Wasp home invasion. Australia's wildlife is known for being beautiful, bizarre, and sometimes deadly. Late last year, one woman from Down Under took to social media for help identifying a collection of mysterious brown blobs that appeared on her bathroom wall. Many commenters had no idea what the formations were, but they were horrified enough by this sight alone to tell the woman to just pick up and move. Why take the risk? Finally, some people recognized the structures as mud dauber wasp nests, and ecologist Dieter Hochuli confirmed this. But, he added, the things that go on inside their nests are nothing short of nightmarish. Mud dauber wasps paralyze spiders and seal them inside their nests, where they lay their eggs. Once hatched, the larvae feast on the dead spiders until they are ready to emerge from their nest and enter the outside world. Basically, the woman had zombie spiders and baby wasps growing on her walls. The good news is that the species is generally considered relatively harmless to humans, according to Hochuli, and he said that people should avoid spraying these nests because it could make the wasp mad and it will sting you. You are supposed to remove the nest from the home when the wasps aren't in it or near it. I think I'd probably just call a professional, or just never use that bathroom again. North York skeletons. A collection of human skeletons found inside the dark and spooky caves of the North York moors in the United Kingdom were likely the victims of an obscure ritual sacrifice more than 2,000 years ago. These human remains were first found in the early 19th century, with major excavations taking place in the 1950s. At the time, researchers knew the skeletons had experienced some sort of serious trauma. However, it wasn't until recently that a more detailed investigation was able to get done, at which point scientists realized one of the dead people had been scalped, and all of them had experienced significant trauma. The caves in North York were occupied beginning about 4,500 years ago, with humans finally moving out of the cave sometime after the Roman occupation of Britain in the 5th century AD. We really did love living in our caves. The skeletons, in terms of their injuries, had been pretty badly mutilated. Researchers discovered trauma in the jawbone of one skull, suggesting he had been bashed with a sharp instrument. In fact, signs of violence were found on all the skeletons. Cut marks along the top of the cranium suggest scalping. However, this kind of thing wasn't that popular in Britain, and so it left archaeologists a little shaken and surprised because they don't know why the people were sacrificed, or who would even have done such a thing, except maybe a group of witches. Mysterious coins. A tour guide in Israel named Yotam Dahan was out camping with his family on a beach near the hamlet of Atlit when he stumbled upon an extraordinary archaeological discovery. It was a green clump of metal that turned out to be 13 pounds of ancient coins from 1,700 years ago. It was basically a cannonball made out of rusted old coins. After Dahan posted pictures of this shocking discovery online, the Israel Antiquities Authority got in touch with him. They sent a coin expert to determine how old and how valuable the coins truly were, because by law, you have to report your finds in case they are deemed a national treasure. It turns out they were minted during the 4th century AD. Additionally, scraps of cloth left clinging to the clump of coins shows that they were probably packed in a bag. Somebody was walking around with 13 pounds of cash in a sack when something happened and they lost their treasure. What happened to the owner of the coins is anyone's guess. The area was used as a harbor where ships docked overnight in ancient times. It's possible that the cache of coins belonged to a ship and was meant to be used for trade when the bag somehow went overboard and was lost underwater. Throughout the next almost 2,000 years, the shifting tides gradually pushed the giant clump of coins onto the beach, where Dahan accidentally found them. Giant comet. Astronomers have just found the biggest comet ever. Oh yes, and it's heading our way. According to the Department of Physics at the University of Pennsylvania, the comet is somewhere between 62 and 124 miles across. It's absolutely gigantic and is due to approach our sun in the year 2031. It's not headed straight for our planet, so we probably don't need to worry about being annihilated just yet, but it is coming dangerously close. so close that you could probably see it from your backyard with the right telescope. The comet is coming from the outskirts of our solar system. It's actually been on its way to the sun for a couple million years, so it's been taking its sweet time. That's also how you can tell how huge our solar system is. In fact, this comet is the farthest thing from us to ever be picked up by our telescopes as it speeds towards the sun. It was found using the dark energy camera at an observatory in Chile. Data was collected using the camera for 6 years, taking the manpower of over 400 scientists from 7 countries. The camera is helping to create a full map of about 300 galaxies, and it's also managed to pick up this giant comet, the biggest ever found. Man in a tree. A mysterious mummy was discovered frozen in a tree in Siberia. This isn't just a creepy discovery, it's a little unusual. According to the local Russian reports, the man was discovered 50 feet above the ground, petrified inside of the tree. He had been dead for just shy of a year. How and why he got up the tree in the first place is just as bizarre as the fact that nobody seemed to notice a dead guy in a tree. It's believed that he climbed the tree in the winter, perhaps to escape the cold or a bear, but died from hypothermia. He then slowly froze into a mummy, stuck up in the branches like a giant bird's nest. It was a father and son who finally noticed the body in the tree and worked to get his creepy corpse down. The last we heard, the local authorities were still trying to identify him. An abandoned mall. Earlier this year, a TikTok user who goes by the handle at Claire.Shulin rented a condo in Hollywood Beach, Florida on Airbnb. While there, she and her friend discovered an abandoned mall in the building's basement. Claire posted eerie footage of the disturbingly vacant facility, prompting alarmed reactions from followers, including one commenter who said they had a bad feeling about the place and advised the pair to leave. The video garnered nearly 6 million views in just 3 days. A man named Josh replied to the video saying that he had stayed at the site before. He was aware of the deserted mall and described the building as so run down and sketchy. Claire did not specify exactly where she was staying, but social media users speculated that she rented a condo at the Hollywood Beach Resort, which sits above the Ocean Walk Mall. Once a bustling shopping center, the beachfront mall is long abandoned, although the rooms and condos above it remain in use. The building is allegedly haunted, according to one Reddit user who seemed happy to be moving out of the area. Anyone who's interested in seeing the place for themselves can rent a room or apartment on Airbnb, where several owners advertise their space. But in addition to being downright creepy, the property has a reputation for being outdated, musty, and a haven for shady visitors. Go at your own risk. Bone tools. Scientists have discovered proof that a pre-Aztec civilization in Mexico used the bones of their dead relatives to fashion all kinds of everyday items, from buttons to combs, spatulas, and even everyday utensils. 5,000 bone fragments were taken from beneath the ancient city of Teotihuacan near Mexico City and analyzed. These were mostly femurs, shin bones, and human skulls. A large majority of them had been turned into household items. The people who lived at Teotihuacan before the Aztecs ever occupied the city removed the flesh and muscles from the bones using stone knives. They did this as quickly after death as possible, as the body needed to be fresh so that the bones were still strong. This civilization, who lived in Teotihuacan between 100 BC and 650 AD, also practiced human sacrifice. Of course, they had no fear of death, even burying their own loved ones underneath the foundations of their houses after cutting them apart and turning their bones into things like knives, forks, and spoons. Christian inscription. Researchers believe they have discovered the earliest surviving Christian inscription in history, taken from a medieval tower in the suburbs of Rome. The inscription is written in Greek and dates back to the 2nd century AD. Back then, the Roman Empire was at its peak of power and influence. The only other written remains that have anything to do with Christianity from this period are fragments of old papyrus that quote part of the Gospels. The stone inscription only alludes to the beliefs of Christians at the time. Gregory Snyder from Davidson College in North Carolina says the inscription incorporates both Christian and pagan beliefs. The man who wrote the inscription is believed to have followed the teachings of Valentinus, one of the earliest preachers of Christianity who was ultimately declared a heretic by Rome. He taught that nothing in the physical world mattered, so nothing that you did in life mattered once you died. It only mattered what you believed in. His teachings were probably inspired both by Christ and Plato. It was a very unique mashup, and one of the earliest forms of Christianity widely practiced. In any case, this is the earliest stone inscription that directly mentions the Father and the Son, meaning God and Jesus. Who exactly wrote it or why, that's a mystery that will probably never be solved. Ancient poop. In a pretty bizarre discovery, scientists have found proof of an extinction event inside the human gut, and it was all thanks to piles of ancient poop, more formally known as coprolites. Let's start with the science behind it. Every meal digested by you is done so with the help of bacteria inside your intestines. When you finish digesting your food, those bacteria also come out of you. There are ecosystems inside the human gut with billions of bacteria. There's a whole world living in there. By studying piles of dried coprolites from 1,000 years ago, scientists have been able to identify how the human gut has changed with the invention of sanitation, food processing, and antibiotics. The preserved prehistoric feces were found in rock shelters in both Utah and Mexico. Justin Sonnenberg with Stanford University has compared the fossilized feces to a time machine. He and his team were able to look at the ancient gut bacteria in our stomachs 1,000 years ago, thanks to these surprising artifacts. What they found is evidence of an extinction event. It looks like we have lost a significant number of bacterial species over the past millennium. This is not good news. It means that we have lost many of the important bacteria critical for keeping us healthy. Researchers have linked the loss of bacteria in our guts to the rise of diabetes, obesity, and allergies. We've lost the bacteria because our diets changed, we started eating too much processed food, and we have been living sheltered lives. If we ever go back to fending for ourselves in the wild, we're going to be in some serious trouble. Creepy shipwreck. Off the coast of Bulgaria in the Black Sea, a team of researchers have discovered a creepy abandoned ship that has been lost for 2,400 years. This ship was once a Greek merchant vessel, but now looks like something from an underwater nightmare. Helen Farr, who was involved with the expedition, told the BBC it was like something from another world. They discovered the ship using their remotely operated vehicle. The thing rose up out of nowhere, suddenly appearing in the glare from the vehicle's headlights. The ship is so perfectly preserved it seems to be stuck in time. The reason the ship has been preserved so well is that the water at the bottom of the Black Sea contains very little oxygen. There wasn't anything to help the ship decay or deteriorate. As for where it came from and how it sank, it had probably been moving between the ancient Greek colonies when it was hit by a storm, where there was an accident that caused the vessel to take on water. Unfortunately, the ship is so deep, about 1.2 miles below the surface, that it's beyond the reach of archaeologists. There is no way for them to breach its hold and find out what kind of mysterious cargo the ship was carrying. A desperate stowaway. Just recently, Afghanistan has erupted into chaos as the Taliban takes over parts of the country. It's a sad and scary situation, with many Afghani citizens resorting to extremes amid their desperation to leave. Footage of people swarming the runways at the Kabul airport and clinging to military aircrafts are flooding the front pages of newspapers around the world. A U.S. Air Force C-17 transport plane recently had to make an emergency landing after taking off from Kabul when the pilots noticed that they couldn't retract the landing gear. Inside the wheel well, they found the body of a stowaway. Someone had managed to sneak up into the wheel area to try to get out of the country. The disturbing discovery is just one of several recent examples of the lengths people are going in their attempts to flee the Taliban. It's extremely rare for stowaways to survive. Those lucky few are usually young, and the flights are typically short, according to the BBC. There are numerous risks to traveling in a plane's undercarriage. Being crushed by the landing gear is one possibility. Falling out of the plane when the landing gear compartment doors open prior to landing is another. Additionally, an airplane's wheel wells are not pressurized or heated. With temperatures in the sky dropping as low as -81 degrees Fahrenheit, suffering from hypothermia is not just likely, it's pretty much guaranteed. Many stowaways freeze to death, and if the frigid atmosphere doesn't kill someone, low oxygen levels brought on by high altitudes will. Flying anywhere past 18,000 feet above sea level outside of a pressurized cabin causes hypoxia. The person's lungs stop functioning properly, eventually causing them to black out and die. Ancient bear skull. A rather spooky bear skull dated to be 35,000 years old may just be the first solid evidence of humans hunting down cave bears and eating them. The giant skull was found during a Siberian cave excavation by Russian paleontologists. When they examined the bear's skull, they identified a small hole at the back that they say may have been the result of a spear. An early human from the Pleistocene era may have snuck up and stabbed the bear in the head while it was asleep. This makes sense too, seeing as stealth would really be the only way an ancient human could take down a monstrous cave bear, probably while it was hibernating. Cave bears are extinct now, but used to live in the caverns and caves of northern Eurasia. Some scientists say they were hunted to extinction over a period of about 5,000 years by the earliest Homo sapien hunters who moved into the region. This was a pretty scary time in history, with humans living in dark, damp caves and needing to ambush bears as they slept just to survive. But the hole in the bear skull could also be proof of something a little darker than just survival. According to the Smithsonian, the hole in the skull may have been made after the bear was already dead, so that the cave people could use the beast's head in some type of cave ritual. Hugging skeletons. Archaeologists recently exhumed 2 skeletons from an ancient burial site in China who were entombed hugging each other. When the archaeologists dug up their grave, they found them still locked in a powerful embrace that lasted far beyond death. One skeleton is of a man, the other is of a woman. We don't know whether they were best friends or lovers, but we do know that they died about 1,500 years ago. The woman was discovered with a plain silver ring on her finger, so in all likelihood, the couple was married. According to the researchers involved with the discovery, the couple was buried during the Northern Wei dynasty between 386 and 534. This was a very turbulent time for society since Buddhism was rapidly spreading through China. The division of beliefs was causing problems for people while changing the way they viewed life after death. This joint burial could be proof of an emerging importance in everlasting love. Chun Zhang, associate professor with Xiamen University, called it a rare glimpse of the concepts of love, as well as life, death, and the afterlife in ancient China. As for the cause of death, it's pretty grim. Judging by an unhealed injury to the man's right arm, archaeologists say he probably died from the wound, and then his wife died shortly after to be with him in the afterlife. Either that, or they both died of a mysterious illness at the same time. The first animal. Scientists have discovered some of the earliest fossils of animal life on the planet. A Canadian geologist believes that she just found the earliest known fossil of any living animal on Earth. This thing goes back about 1 billion years to what is today a region of northwest Canada. 1 billion years ago, it was under the ocean, a place where life was just starting to flourish. Elizabeth Turner found evidence of ancient sponges preserved in sediment in the Northwest Territories of Canada, in an area so remote that she had to get there by helicopter. After digging at this location for over 30 years, she finally uncovered the skeletons of sponge organisms. The rock in which the sponge skeletons were found is about 890 million years old. This makes the sponge 350 million years older than any other fossil found. It would suggest that sponges, soft organisms that have no muscles or nerves, but just kind of sit on the bottom of the ocean, were the first real creatures to live. The how and why of it and the complicated evolution from sponge to human and bird and giraffe is another story altogether. Human sacrifice. A new ceremonial complex has been discovered in Peru by using new remote sensing techniques. Satellite images helped Spanish researchers to identify around 55 enclosures high up in the mountains of Vilcabamba, about 90 miles from the city of Cusco. This place has never before been explored by archaeologists, but was likely part of the great Inca Empire. The Incas of Vilcabamba held out the longest against the Spanish invaders. They lived in the mountains at an altitude of over 9,800 feet, in a place they called the Cradle of Gold. It was so high in the mountains that the Spaniards had an extremely difficult time conquering it. Francisco de Toledo sent troops to destroy the mountain Incas in the year 1572. There was significant resistance, but the Inca were eventually bested and conquered. In modern times, the high altitude has kept archaeologists from studying the area for decades. Now, thanks to satellite images, they were able to identify ceremonial complexes and climb the mountains to investigate them. One of the creepier things they found is an Inca sanctuary in which children were prepared to be sacrificed. According to researcher Miguel Gutierrez, the victims were often sacrificed to prevent natural disasters or famine, and it was here, high up in the mountains, where many of them were prepared to meet their deaths. Archaeologists also discovered a platform made of rocks where they believe many of the sacrificed kids still remain buried. No bodies have been found just yet, as the archaeologists are still struggling to map the new sites and organize proper excavations. Bizarre basement swamp. One family encountered a rather unpleasant surprise earlier this summer while vacationing in northwest England's Lake District. A man named Rob, who goes by the TikTok username Robertibus, rented a home on Airbnb, hoping to catch a few days of rest and relaxation with his wife, daughter, and dog. His curiosity prompted him to find out what was behind a trap door in the floor beneath the sofa. After moving the furniture, Rob pried the doors open, revealing a dark, dreary staircase leading to the basement. At the bottom of the steps, he found a small brick room filled with a mysterious bright green liquid. The horrified vacationer posted the footage on TikTok, hoping someone would help him identify the strange substance. While most commenters were equally frightened and clueless, someone who works in real estate explained that the home probably had drainage issues. She said that the liquid was probably green from a tracing dye that may have been used in a previous attempt to locate a sewer. Rob confronted the homeowner, who confirmed that the basement had a leak and that the dye was used in an attempt to locate where the water was coming from. While the explanation made the situation a lot less scary, he pointed out that perhaps the property owner should make renters aware of the situation or lock the door leading to the basement. Not a bad idea if you ask me. Thanks for watching! Have you ever found anything creepy like this on Airbnb? Let me know in the comments below. And be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. See you later! Bye!